quorum. So with that, I'll call the meeting to order. We'll ask that those who are with us to stand if they are willing and able for the invocation given to us by Pastor Robert Johnson of St. Mark's United Methodist Church, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Pastor, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to come and pray with the council. It's a joy to be with you all. So let us pray. God, our creator, sustainer, and provider, we thank you for this day. We thank you for life. We thank you for our families, our friends, and our resources. And we thank you for our opportunities. We thank you for our city and our city's leaders and servants. And we thank you for the opportunity and privilege to serve this great city. Creator God, we thank you for the grace and strength you have given us to be at this meeting this morning. In a sense, it's just another meeting, but in a larger sense, this meeting today, October 6th, 2020, can be a transformative gathering if we find our way to new insights and breakthrough agreements. So guide our meeting so that it will be that kind of gathering. Creator God, this has been a difficult year for our nation and our city. These are unsettling times. We are met with illness, setback, closures, ambiguity, fear, hate, division, and so many other challenges. We need your wisdom and guidance. We humble ourselves to you, and we ask that you give us the grace we need to not only survive these times, but thrive by finding new ways to serve your people. Again, God, we thank you for this day, and we ask for your blessing. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Again, we appreciate the prayer, Pastor. Moving into the approval of minutes of the regular meeting on September 22nd, 2020, did any member not have a chance to review the minutes? If every member has reviewed the minutes and there is no discussion, then I'll make a motion to accept the minutes as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. If there's no discussion on said motion, clerk will open the roll. Members cast the vote. With a result of 5 yeas to 0 nays, the motion does pass. Under proclamations, the first proclamation would be in recognition of Financial Literacy Month, and I shall read it. Proclamation of the City of Wichita, Kansas, founded in 1870. Whereas, since 2003, the President of the United States has declared April as Financial Literacy Month to raise public awareness about the importance of financial education. And whereas many Wichita citizens struggle to manage their money due to a lack of financial literacy. And whereas by working together through financial education programs for all ages and all income levels, we can eliminate or greatly reduce poverty and prepare our future generations for better financial decisions and results. And whereas Wichita envisions a time when all citizens of our city and state have the financial literacy knowledge and skills to ensure economic success. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Brandon Whipple, Mayor of the City of Wichita, Kansas, along with the Wichita City Council, do hereby proclaim October 6, 2020 as Financial Literacy Month, and call upon all citizens to observe this month with programs and activities to improve their understanding of financial principles and practices in order to reinforce future financial security for life. Next proclamation will be in recognition of Walktober, and I shall read. Proclamation of the City of Wichita, Kansas, founded in 1870. Whereas experts agree that physical activity is one of the most important things Americans can do to improve their health and recommend that youth get 60 minutes of physical activity each day and adults get 150 minutes of physical activity each week. And whereas Bike Walk Wichita has deemed the month of October as Walktober and is designed for everyone, from inactive individuals to those already making great strides towards better health, anyone can step it up and be successful with this cool weather walking program. And whereas walking is a great way to get physical activity needed to obtain health benefits, walking does not require any special skills. It also does not require gym membership or expensive equipment. And whereas Bike Walk Wichita, in collaboration with the Health and Wellness Coalition of Wichita and the organizations, are challenging residents to join one of 2 weekly group walks, take a walking tour using a Bike Walk Wichita app, or lead a walking group in your neighborhood. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Brandon Whipple, Mayor of the City of Wichita, Kansas, along with the Wichita City Council, do hereby proclaim October 1st through the 31st, 2020 as Walktober in the City of Wichita, and encourage all citizens to add walking as part of their daily routine. Madam Clerk. Oh, excuse me, I got an award that I have to present. Before we get to the regular agenda. Next would be a recognition of the award from the Certificate of Distinction in Performance Management. Today, I am pleased to acknowledge staff for earning the International City/County Management Association Certificate of Distinction for Performance Management. This is the 10th year that the City of Wichita has earned a Performance Measurement Award from ICMA. The award recognizes programs that instill a culture of performance management, pursue comparative data analysis and data-informed decision-making, and share results with residents. The City of Wichita collects and reports over 400 performance measurements in the budget document and the annual performance measure report. Many staff from throughout the organization collect, report, and evaluate data in order to improve service delivery for residents and to improve transparency. These efforts are coordinated by staff and the Department of Finance. Please join me in congratulating our staff.
Mayor, thank you. I want to recognize the work of Elizabeth Goltry-Wadle and the staff in the budget department, as well as Mark Manning, who's the interim finance director. The performance measurement system has, I think, become more advanced every year that we progress through it. And the data that was supplied by that helped us immensely as we were struggling with our budget problems this year. So again, I want to thank the staff for the significant amount of work they put into it, as well as the department directors, who I think, again, are becoming much more sophisticated in their use of data and in their analysis and in their budget recommendations.
Of course, well said. Madam Clerk.
Andrew Crane, Issues in the Blind Community.
All right, we're going to move into our public agenda. We will defer the floor over to Century 2, where staff is set up to hear from the public.
Mayor, Mr. Crane did not make it in yet this morning.
All right, well, thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to speak? Oh, never mind, on public agenda, you have to sign up in advance. So moving on to the next item, Madam Clerk.
Consent agenda items 1 through 13.
Has every member had a chance to review the consent agenda items? And if so, is there any discussion? Chair recognizes Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Mayor. I would just like to point out that there are 2 items on the consent agenda item that are not normally on our consent agenda. One is something that Mayor, Councilmember Blubaugh, and myself worked on, and that is Visit Wichita Transparency Reports. And then the second is the annual report for Stryker, which when we approved that a year and a half ago, the council asked that come back as show us annual performance reviews. And even though the COVID struggle has affected them, they've done pretty well. And so just wanted to highlight those two important reports.
Very good. Other discussion on the consent agenda? See none. With that, I'll make a motion to accept the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. If there's no discussion on said motion, clerk will open the roll. Members cast the vote. With the result of 6 yeas to 0 nays, the motion does pass. Madam Clerk.
Report of Board of Bids and Contracts dated October 5th, 2020.
Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, City Council. Hannah Lang, Department of Finance, here to present the October 5th Board of Bid recommendations. First engineering bid we have is paving Winston Courtyards at Brookfield Edition. Recommendation is Pearson Construction for groups 1 and 2 for an aggregate total of $197,113.50. Water Distribution System Tide Project to serve Cheryl's Hollow, Second Edition. Mies Construction for groups 1 through 4 for an aggregate total of $363,538. Replace LS number 16, complete station with hinged fiberglass, Smith & Lovelace Incorporated for $68,478. Replace LS number 23, complete station with hinged fiberglass, Smith & Lovelace for $69,895. This is the Purchasing's Procurement website, as well as our current open request for proposals. That is the Board of Bids recommendations. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
Is there any discussion on the item? If there's no discussion, I will make the motion to take staff's recommended action to receive and file the report, approve the contracts, and authorize the necessary signatures. Is there a second?
Second.
From anyone? Motion has been made and seconded. If there's no discussion on said motion, clerk will open the roll. Members cast the vote. With a result of 6 yeas to 0 nays, the motion does pass. Madam Clerk.
Public hearing and request for a letter of intent for industrial revenue bonds, Crestview Residences, LLC.
Good morning, Mayor and City Council members. I'm Tim Goodpasture with the City's Office of Economic Development. For the record, the item before you is a request for a letter of intent to issue multifamily housing revenue bonds, letter of intent for Crestview Residences. Crestview Residences, LLC is a real estate holding entity that was recently developed and will be doing business as the Verandas at Crestview. It is a Wichita-based investment group which is led by John Greenstreet. They are acquiring approximately 2.5 acres at 300 North 127th Street East, and it is requesting a letter of intent to issue multifamily housing revenue bonds in an amount not to exceed $6,250,000. The facility will be located south of Central on 127th Street. You can see the area outlined in red here is just south of the exit from the Turnpike and from K96. Central is running from left to right at the top of the aerial, and 127th Street is running roughly through the middle. The facility will include 88 units for low-income residents. 72 will be one-bedroom units, and 16 will be two-bedroom units. The total investment in this project is approximately $16.8 million. The units will include granite countertops, walk-in closets, 9-foot ceilings, Energy Star rated appliances, and in-unit washers and dryers, as well as Wi-Fi. The facility will have a pool and pool house. Recycling will be included, and access will be controlled by a gate, with each tenant having its own access code. The buildings will be designed in a craftsman or prairie style. All the buildings will be approximately 3 stories in nature. There will be 3 buildings in addition to the clubhouse. Crestview Residences has applied for 4% low-income housing tax credits through the state of Kansas, which requires the use of tax-exempt bonds, which provide an interest savings. The bonds will be used for sales tax exemption only. No property tax abatement has been requested, and the bonds will be privately placed. The property will have a HUD 221D4 mortgage for approximately $7 million. They're utilizing 4% tax credits for approximately $3.5 million worth of equity, tax exempt bonds for approximately $5.7 million, and a deferred developer's fee of approximately $620,000, again for total investment of approximately $16.8 million. Therefore, it is staff's recommendation that the City Council close the public hearing, adopt the resolution of intent, and authorize the necessary signatures. I believe John Greenstreet may be at Century 2 and can answer any questions specific to the project, and I would be happy to stand for any questions as well.
Head on over to Century 2 to see if there's anybody there would like to speak to this, or at least somebody standing for questions. Maybe they would wait until there's...
Mr. Mayor, we do have a gentleman here who is available to answer any questions.
Excellent. Are there any questions or discussions on this item? If there is none, then I will make a motion to take staff's recommended action to close the public hearing, adopt the resolution of intent, and authorize the necessary signatures. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. If there's no discussion on said motion, clerk will open the roll. Members will cast the vote. With the result of 6 yeas to 0 nays, the motion does pass. Madam Clerk.
Public hearing and request for letter of intent for healthcare facilities revenue bonds, Larksfield Place.
Again, Mayor, City Council members, Tim Goodpasture with the City's Office of Economic Development for the record. The request before you is for a letter of intent for Larksfield Place for healthcare facilities revenue bonds. Larksfield Place was established over 30 years ago and is a provider of independent living, assisted living, home health care, dementia care, and other senior services. It is a 501c3 private not-for-profit that is located at 29th and Rock Road approximately. You can see here in this aerial, 29th Street is running from left to right at the top of the aerial. Rock Road is a little right of center. The area outlined in red is what encompasses the Larksfield Place campus. In 2010, the city issued healthcare facility revenue bonds that financed construction of an addition to Larksfield Place at 2727 North Rock Road. And in 2013, the city issued bonds to finance the construction and renovation of approximately 10,000 square feet at 2828 North Governor, just south of 29th Street. The company is now requesting a letter of intent to issue healthcare facilities revenue bonds in an amount not to exceed $50 million. The bonds will be issued in 3 series. The first series would refinance the 2010 and 2013 bonds to achieve interest rate savings. There would be also approximately $5 million for new improvements to the facility, and approximately $6 million could fund a bond reserve and contingency fund. In terms of the $5 million in new money, there would be improvements to the healthcare resident room for their renovations and kitchen expansion, a parking lot expansion, updated entry gates and card readers, and common space furnishings in all of the facilities. There would also be improvements to the fitness and wellness center, as well as campus-wide video surveillance, IT and communications infrastructure, and exterior building upgrades. Therefore, it is staff's recommendation that the City Council close the public hearing, adopt the resolution of intent, and authorize the necessary signatures. And I would be happy to answer any questions.
Discussion on the item. Chair recognizes Councilmember Tuttle.
Thank you, and not really a question, but just a couple comments. As with the last agenda item and in this one as well, thank you to anyone who's willing to invest in our community, especially District 2. But during this very challenging time, it's great to see that there's still expansion and things happening. And a big thanks to Tim and to Scott and for our economic development team for all their assistance with this project. So thank you. I'll be robustly supportive.
Is there any other discussion on the item? If not, the chair recognizes Councilmember from District 2 for a motion.
Thank you. I would like to make a motion to close the public hearing, adopt the resolution of an intent, and authorize the necessary signatures.
And I will second the motion. Motion's been made and seconded. If there's no discussion on said motion, clerk will open a roll. Members cast the vote. With a result of 6 yeas to 0 nays, the motion does pass. Madam Clerk.
Resolution setting a public hearing for consideration of a project plan, tax increment financing for Riverside Infrastructure Project Plan.
Good morning, Mayor, members of City Council. Mark Elder with the Office of Economic Development. The item before you today is consideration of setting a public hearing to consider the project plan for the Riverside Infrastructure Project, which is within the Riverside Housing TIF District. So this item is just setting a public hearing for November. But a little history: that the district was established in 2020, earlier this year, for the redevelopment of the vacant land and structures just north of the golf course. The boundaries are Abatement Avenue to McLean Boulevard going east to west, and then along the river from 13th Street on the north to West Street, or West Central on the south. This aerial here gives you a depiction of the TIF redevelopment district as well as the project area boundary. They are matching on this one. Occasionally you can't have a TIF district with more than one project area. This one is just one project area. A little zoom in here on a little more focus on those redevelopment areas. The area in blue is where the proposed riverbank and path improvements are proposed to occur. It does occur further south, but it's the rest of that area. The area in yellow is the trailhead that is a proposed improvement, and then the area in red is where the private development would occur. The overall project area is approximately 90 acres. That consists of approximately 7 acres that would be the private housing development, and the remaining area would be the river, the paths, the trailheads, and the other improvements. The private development includes construction of 40 patio homes, and then there is infrastructure supporting that development. The additional TIF improvements would be the riverbank and river path improvements, as well as the trailhead path for the path north of the development. A little more detail on that: those proposed TIF improvements would be infrastructure that supports the development, including a lift station for approximately $700,000. The developer would personally guarantee any bonds that are issued for that. In addition, there would be the public improvements estimated to be about $1 million. That would be for the riverbank and river path improvements, as well as the trailhead for the path north of the development. A little more breakdown in the project plan. So there's $1.7 million in total project cost. At this time, it is being proposed for $700,000 worth of TIF bonds that would be issued. That would be guaranteed again by the developer. Although the project plan does see a capacity of $1.4 million in TIF bonds, but this time, if there's no guarantee to go over that, then it's not proposed to issue those additional bonds. So the remaining amount would be used as $1 million of pay-as-you-go financing to pay for those additional TIF improvements as the revenue comes in. So in other words, once the city issues those TIF bonds and we have a debt service payment set, the funds that the city receives that are over the amount we need to pay for the bonds would be used as a pay-as-you-go to fund those additional improvements over time. This is a proposed site plan for the development. This may not be the final one, but this is the one being considered at this time by the developers. And then I just have a couple renderings of what some of the homes may look like in the area. With that, the staff recommendation is to adopt the resolution setting a public hearing for November 10th. With that, I will stand for any questions.
Are there questions on this item or discussion?
Mayor, if I may.
Of course.
Mark, would you clarify, there's a statement in the report that I think may be a little misleading, and that has to do with ownership of the property. The parcel that will have the private development was not purchased from the city, and but there are city parcels that are involved in this. You want to clarify that?
Right. The area that was owned by, or that is being developed, was purchased privately by the developer. There was a land swap that. Let's see if I can
Go back to the map.
go back to that. You can sort of see there's a property line here, and so to kind of make that a more developable site, there was a transaction that occurred where the city owned this area here, and then the triangle, I believe, was owned by the developer at that time, and they made a trade there to make their area a little more developable, and at the same time provided a roughly equal amount of land to the north for the park. Is that? Yeah, okay.
Further discussion, Councilmember Bluebog.
Thank you, Mayor. Where does the 90 acres come into effect?
It's a rough calculation of the entire area, including down by the river. So it was just a rough measurement on our aerial to kind of give an example. But as I had said, the area being developed by the privately is a lot smaller.
But the 90 acres is a combination of the public land and this private development.
Correct. It is a total area that is encompassed within the project area.
Okay, thank you.
Further discussion on the item? If there is no further discussion, I will make a motion to accept staff's recommended action to adopt the resolution setting a public hearing on November 10th, 2020 for consideration of the Riverside Infrastructure Project Plan and authorize the necessary signatures. Is there a second? Is there a second?
James.
My apologies, I wasn't sure if I heard that. For the result of 6 yeas to 0 nays, the motion does pass. Thank you. Next item.
Assignment of Development Agreement and Guarantee Agreement, River Vista LLC.
Good morning, Mark Gilder again with the Office of Economic Development. This request is for an assignment of the development agreement and guarantee agreement that is currently with River Vista LLC, the developer of the project. In 2013, the River Vista project began. It was a $24 million apartment and retail development with the river, but it also included riverbank and park improvements. The overall project utilized STAR bonds, TIF financing, as well as CID financing. In 2013 is when the city originally entered into a development agreement with River Vista LLC, but that agreement was further amended in 2015 and 2019. There is a development agreement that is outstanding that was both for during the development of the project, as well as there are certain elements that carry on once the project itself was completed. Those include a guarantee for the payment of the TIF and the CID bonds, and the developers of the project of River Vista LLC have provided personal guarantees for the payment of that guarantee. So River Vista LLC recently sold the project to River Vista Acquisition LLC. River Vista Acquisition LLC is a single-purpose LLC that was used to acquire that. And River Vista Acquisition LLC has agreed to the assignment of the development agreement as well as the guarantee. With that, River Vista LLC has requested a release from the agreement and guarantee with approval of this assignment. Maxis Realty Trust is the affiliate owner of River Vista Acquisition LLC, and it has agreed to assume the agreement and guarantee for the project. This company was vetted by Piper Sandler, which is the city's financial advisor, and they have recommended that Maxis has the capacity to meet the obligations under the agreement and the guarantee. With that, staff will stand for any questions.
I have one. I'm wondering, we're going from a personal guarantee, which means we know pretty much who's on the hook if this goes wrong, to a corporate guarantee. Do we know who owns or who's behind the Maxis Realty Trust?
We do. I don't know the complete ownership, but it's a majority owned by an individual in Kansas City. But Maxis is also a publicly traded company, and with the vetting by Piper Sandler, they felt that there's a very good assurance that this would, not have any problems transitioning from personal to the corporation supporting that.
And you said we do know the individual who owns the majority, and just with the mass, it's a little tough for me to hear. But the other part of the company is publicly shared?
Correct. The Maxis is publicly, all the information is publicly available on that. It's Piper Sandler provided that memo that provides that their comfort level that this would carry through.
Okay, in the memo, does it say who owns? who the owners are? I mean, if it's publicly shared, I think that
do not
that information's
recall
out
if
there.
it does. I do not have the name in front of me, but that can be provided for you.
I believe that our financial consultant uses the same standards that we used when we took the personal guarantees, and that's to ensure that Maxis has the assets available for the payment or of the guarantee should there be a default, so to speak, or not sufficient funds to be able to pay the debt. And that's what the council's policy on vetting has required, is that there is a proof of assets. And that's what we have verified through our financial consultant.
Verified proof of assets being held by the corporation, and I'm just not sure if it's common for us to know the owners of the corporation, or is that, my understanding is that that's in a memo, or is that usually not
Well,
disclosed?
since it's a publicly traded company, that is public information, and we can provide that to the council.
Okay, thank you. Other questions or discussions on this item? See none, since it falls into District 6, and Vice Mayor is not here, I'll go ahead and make the motion to accept the recommended action to adopt the resolution which approves the assignment of the development agreement and terminates the existing guarantee upon execution and delivery of the guarantee agreement by Maximus and authorize the necessary signatures.
Second.
Motion has been made, motion has been made and seconded. Clerk will open the roll, members cast their vote. With the result of 6 yeas to 0 nays, the motion does pass. Madam Clerk.
Parking agreement and parking addendum for city-owned parking spaces in the surface parking lot of 200 South Broadway.
Good morning, Mayor, members of council, Scott Rigby, City Manager's Office. Today before you, you have a parking agreement on parking addendum. This is related to Herculis Investments, LLC. They control the building at 333 East English, which is immediately south of the public lot that we'll show you here in a second. They currently lease surface spaces at the city lot on a month-to-month basis, and they're seeking to enter into a 5-year lease with the city for those spaces. This is the lot. Broadway's on the west, English is on the south. The building they control is that building at the southeast corner of English and Broadway. As you can see, our lot has quite a bit of capacity. They're needing 22 spaces. They, under this lease, they could lease up to 35 spaces for up to 5 years. The terms is $30 per space per month. So the annual minimum lease revenue based on 22 spaces would be $7,920. Again, this lot was redeveloped when the state had their state offices in the building just to the north. Once they vacated, it is largely a vacant city lot. The future Kansas Health Science Project, which controls a number of businesses, does have options to lease the entire lot at some future date. If that happens, they have agreed that this lease would not be impeded by that parking agreement with Herculis Investments. So that opportunity for Herculis would continue for that 5-year term. Consequently, the city, it's recommendation of the city, the staff, that the city council approve the parking lease agreement and the parking addendum and authorize all necessary signatures. Larry Weber, representative for Herculis, is over at C2 in case there's any questions. I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions or discussion on the item? There's no questions or discussion. The chair will recognize the gentleman from District 1 for a motion.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to move that the City Council approve the parking lease agreement with parking addendum and authorize all necessary signatures.
I will second. There's no discussion as said motion. Clerk will open the roll. Members cast the vote. The result of 6 yeas to 0 nays, the motion does pass. Madam Clerk.
Economic Development Guidelines Update.
Again, Scott Reed, the City Manager's Office. Excited to come before you. It's been roughly two and a half years in the making that we're back here. Talk a little about economic development and guidelines or incentives. Just a little background. Our office particularly focuses on 3 areas: business attraction, business retention, and development assistance. And these guidelines impact all three levels of those focuses. And so the effort today is to try and codify each of those guidelines into one document. Just a little bit of past history about success and what that has meant over since 2017, 18, and 19. You'll see the number of jobs, capital investment, average salary, and we'll talk a little bit about those in the next few slides about how in the past that's been so critical for us, and it still is, but the guidelines will adjust that a little bit. Obviously, I will be foolish to think that 2020 will exceed those numbers, but we'll continue to work on moving the community forward. So again, our economic incentive guidelines were last updated in 2012. I don't know if any council members were here at that time, but it's been a while. Typically, as you do incentives, you try and update those on a more regular basis than every 8 years. So our effort started back in 2018 with 2 separate retreat meetings with City Council. Again, one in the spring of this year, and then just recently in the last few weeks with council to get feedback as we've worked through this draft document. Since 2018, we've also been working with our partners down at the Greater Wichita Partnership, businesses, developers, as well as the land bank and incentive subcommittees, the places for people, as well as general people out in the community. So it's been a long effort, a lot of feedback, a lot of good insight and discussion. I just want to walk through probably 5 to 6 major significant changes. Obviously, there's more minor changes throughout the whole document, but these are I'll call them the 6 significant changes that we have addressed. And probably the first and major one is, as we talk about incentives, there's a overall effort. We do a property tax abatement consideration. There has been a matrix that's been around for probably close to 15, 20 years, and before the 2012 update, that laid out the key criteria for evaluating projects. In the old matrix, weighted 3 factors: jobs, the greater the amount of those jobs, the greater the weight on the evaluation. Capital investment, again, the tendency was the greater the capital investment, the greater abatement percentage you would receive. An average wage, again, the higher the wage, the more weight it would provide on the assessment. And so that was really weighted towards larger, significant projects. 100, 200, 500 jobs would weigh heavily in that capital investment. So it tended to be the more major, significant companies within the community. The new focus we've focused on is how do we help more medium to small businesses utilize our incentives to help them grow. Because while they may not be adding 500 jobs, they may only be adding 5 jobs, but to them, that's a significant expansion. We want to recognize that. So the new abatement proposal is, you'll see this scale here. If they're adding 10 jobs in the abatement value, they get 30%. Obviously, as it moves up, a greater percentage of capital investment. This is pretty unusual. In the past, you had to have a significant capital investment, but if I'm a small business and I'm hiring 5 people and I'm investing $2 million, this abatement would show that, off the bat, you could get 70% of your property tax abated for the 10 years. Then as we move through the effort, in the past, the old program really made it difficult for council to consider other qualifications for a project to consider for abatements. So one of the things we brought forward as we talked to council is additional considerations that wouldn't be, I'll call it exceptions, but considerations. In the past, the council had to make an exception to consider these additional factors. We want to make it part of the overall fabric as we evaluate companies. So for example, if a company is within one of our sectors in the regional growth plan, such as advanced manufacturing, energy, advanced aerospace, transportation, healthcare, they would receive up to a 10% abatement. If they receive a state or federal or utility incentive, they would qualify for additional. As you see down there, sustainable development, we want to encourage, whether it be solar or wind or other technologies, to have sustainable development. And then these last ones, we found it to be most interesting, is investing or funding entrepreneurship, talent attraction. As we know, in the last few years, it's been a big focus in the communities. How do we attract and keep talent? How do we encourage our business to locate in some of our redevelopment areas that may be looking even more importantly for investment than maybe some of our greenfield areas? And then how do we encourage companies to utilize our community workforce development benefits? So one of the first questions came up from council is, where is that redevelopment area? When we talk about redevelopment areas, what is that? And so just a number of bullet points here is, one of the qualifications is more than 30% of the population lives at or below the federal poverty line. More than 30% of the population is unemployed. More than 30% of the structures are vacant or uninhabitable. Located within an urban renewal or opportunity zone, or other factors or special areas as defined by the council. This can be anywhere in the city, as long as that census tract meets one of those areas. It could be deemed a redevelopment area. But for the sake of this discussion, the sake to focus, we landed on, after discussion with council, urban renewal or opportunity zones. So here's a map, previously approved urban renewal zones, plus the recently approved federally opportunity zones. So this is the outlined area. Obviously, at any time, if council wants to amend or change this map based on further feedback and desire to look at additional areas, we can do that. Again, the goal is not to be back here in 2028 for the next update. We'd rather do it on an ongoing basis as you see the need. So for right now, this is our recommendation for the redevelopment area. So if a company were to locate in this area or a separate census tract that meets those bullet points that we identified in the previous slide, they could qualify for additional percentage of abatement on their property tax. The other one is community workforce development. We think this is a critical one to how do we lift up our community to maybe those that are maybe underemployed or lacking skills, or maybe have past history that may be impacting their ability to be hired. So we looked at how do we reward companies or recognize companies who are looking at hiring and providing job training and certification. So obviously we've listed some of the qualifications they have to do. They have to demonstrate that to us, that there's documented contracts with the state, or they're doing a formal on-the-job training manuals. They have to identify that up front, and at our 5-year review, they have to demonstrate that they implemented that and have hired people according to that. Again, education, it's so key in the workforce today, is constantly upskilling or bringing people up to the new scale. So for example, do they have contracts or agreements with WSU Tech, Butler Community College, NIAR, or other organizations that we can recognize and what their agreements are. So again, the company identifies we're going to hire 10 people. We're going to utilize our agreements with WSU Tech, for example, to do ongoing training. They'll identify that, the 5-year review. They'll demonstrate that again for their additional property tax consideration. So let me just walk through an example. This is quite significantly different than the previous. Again, the previous is greater the number of jobs, greater amount of capital investment, and the higher the wage, the more they would rate or be eligible for a property tax abatement. On this, if you can remember that scale before, so for example, if company A is projecting it would create 10 new qualifying wage jobs, it would qualify for 30% abatement. If it then invest $4 million in facilities, it would qualify for an additional 40%. So now they're at 70% abatement. If then the company is in a regional growth plan, let's say that the energy sector or aerospace, they would qualify for another 10%. Then lastly, if the company is also utilizing state of Kansas incentives, they would qualify for an additional 10%. So for a total of 9% abatement. The old matrix was, we found difficult for a lot of our businesses to understand and to figure out what they were eligible to receive. This is much simpler. So as we put this out, pending approval from council on the web, or as we talk to businesses, they can sit there and, for example, if they were considering locations, they may say, if I locate in that urban renewal area, we're going to get additional, whatever that percent is. If we're going to be utilizing solar or wind energy, we could get an additional abatement. Those are considerations in the past we wouldn't have not have recognized. We've said that's great, but in our matrix it doesn't fall into that aspect. So we think this provides a lot more latitude for our businesses, whether existing or new businesses, to qualify for a higher level of abatements. One of the other things we found in our previous policy is if For example, a large company, you pick one of our large aerospace manufacturers who are investing tens of millions of dollars on an ongoing basis, they could receive a 10-year tax abatement without the need for a 5-year look back. Previously, that was a minimum of $50 million over 5 years, so quite a bit of capital investment each year. Again, that weighted heavily for larger projects, but let's say you're a smaller, mid-sized company that says we're going to do, in their mind, significant capital investments, and we want to recognize that. So we've dropped that threshold down to $25 million. So if they're going to do $5 million worth of improvements over a 5-year basis, we think that they should qualify for the additional benefit. And again, our rationale is if they're making that on an annual basis, let's say that $5 million investment, that means they're either growing or they're continuing to revamping their business to be even more successful in the coming years. We want to recognize that. Again, if there's any questions, you can stop me at any time. Number 2, just a recap. And back in late 2017, we improved a spec industrial program. A little back history, talking with the partnership and our other partners as we met out in the community, as well went out to Dallas and Chicago and other areas. We talked to site selectors. These are the ones that work for companies to locate new businesses and new locations. We found it very clear after hearing from site selectors that the Wichita really wasn't even on the radar for them to consider for new locates of industrial needs. So as we came back is what could we put in a program? So we put in a program that said if you built a minimum 100,000 square foot building, the minimum lease is for 25,000 square feet. Again, this is the goal, is to attract either new users to our market or existing users that need significant new square footage. They could receive, a spec industrial developer could receive a 95% abatement for the first 5 years and then 50% for the second 5 years if 50% of that building was leased at the 5-year mark. To date, we have 3 projects completed, totaling approximately 350,000 square feet. And I know in the last few months, there's been quite a bit of discussion as one of our most recent of these buildings have attracted a pretty prominent e-commerce business. In our discussion with council this spring and this fall, we've heard the same type of situation with our office component. There are some companies that are eager to move into what I'll call existing buildings in the downtown or elsewhere, but there are also a significant number of businesses who are typically out of the market that are looking for what I would call a standard open floor or open space concept that may be changing in light of COVID, but this is an opportunity to, again, incentivize our local development community to provide good Class A, larger floor plate type of business space to our community. This is a minimum 60,000 square foot building, and then again, the minimum lease of 7,500 square feet. So the goal is not to move every little business around, but to reward those who are looking for larger foot plates or for out of market that are coming in looking for larger foot plates. One of the additional things that we heard as we talked to our companies is we did agreements with them for property tax payment, whether it be through investment revenue bonds or economic development exemptions. Under our current policy, if they, for example, don't meet their 5-year commitment, the city had the ability to claw back the entire incentive. So even if they were supposed to generate 100 jobs and they said we've created 95, the council had the opportunity to say, tough, we're going to pull back the entire property tax abatement, versus recognizing that while they may not have met the 100, they did achieve 95. So if you think in school, 95 is an A, why would you say you have to fail if you don't get 100%? If you get 95, you're still going to fail. Because this way, we want to recognize the success of a company. They may not have reached their ultimate goal of 100 jobs, for example. They reached 95, which is still significant. We're recommending it be a proportional clawback. So if they reach 95%, we could claw back 5% that they did not reach. And again, as we talk to businesses, most of our business attorneys said this is a big issue for them as they weighed Do we make a capital investment in this community? Do we commit to a certain number of jobs? And if for some reason you only reach 99 on 100, the council could pull it 100% back. They would often counsel their businesses to really tread carefully on whether to accept the proposed incentive. Number 4 is community improvement districts. This is probably one that's generated the most discussion in the community and council. Just to recap, community improvement districts, they are designated areas, defined areas, typically in new development, to allow the developer, typically on retail commercial projects, to apply for and receive the ability to apply for additional sales tax rate on their development. So up to 2% additional sales tax, up to an additional 22 years. There's been a lot of concern about in the past about do we do CIDs and focus them on redevelopment areas or on greenfield development. Greenfield development was often one that got a lot of attention. If that was already a successful area that's growing on its own, why do we need to provide additional benefit? There's a lot of discussion in the community about different projects forward. The other concern we had as talk to council is in the past we've been working with the developers to say we just don't want to, we want to utilize the city's portion of the CID revenue to benefit, I'll call it a bigger area of the city. In the past, the developer would typically just use their own property for the CID. And so any improvements would have to be on that property alone. We would work with the developers to expand that out to include some of our arterials or public areas around. So if we were able to receive revenues, we could improve streets, fix sidewalks, street lights, those types of things. But again, under the current program, we have to keep our portion of the city fees within that district. In our discussion over these last 2 retreats, the question that come up to city staff is there a way that we could utilize CID funds outside of those districts? Because some would argue if those districts are already being redeveloped or new developed using CID, what's the benefit to the general community? So as we went back and talked to our bond counsel and our legal teams, we determined the way to do this is the creation of what we call an origination fee. And I'll walk through this scenario in a couple of different ways. And the city would have an option to do one or both or combine these. So for example, if a CID proposal came in, the city could, let me go one more forward here. So we go forward. So a project came to the city and said, we're gonna generate $2 million over 20 years. Again, that would be their projection. They'd come to us, that's part of the standard requirement. They have to provide projections of what they would generate over 20 years. $2 million. Under our typical program, we would say, well, we're going to retain 10% of that, or $200,000 over those 20 years, but we will use those funds within the district. Hopefully, we could find streets to improve, sanitary sewer, whatever it may be for public improvements. Under this new program, the city could also determine that in consideration of the CID, the city council could determine the value of approving that CID, for example, is of a value of $100,000. That $100,000 under this origination fee could then be utilized outside of the district for benefits in other parts of the city. The blended option could be you could choose to retain a certain amount of the CID revenue, for example, the 10% for the $200,000, and you could also charge the origination fee. So, for example, $200,000 for $300,000, or you could blend it and say we'll take $100,000 of the, reduce your 10% to 5%, so only generate $100,000 over 20 years, and then have that $100,000 origination fee allows you to keep $100,000 to do in-district improvements, and then take the $100,000 to do other areas. So that's an option for the city to utilize in each and every project comes forward. I would tell you, typically we see about 2 to 3 applications for CID a year. So just a perspective. Let me go back for a second here on that. And one of the things we're recommending, I didn't put on here, and I need to recommend, if the council decides to utilize origination fees, the recommendation that came out of the land bank and the incentive subcommittees and places for people, as we talk with staff and the business community, is to utilize that for the proposed upcoming land bank, and that would be for either maintaining or acquiring property for the land bank. And that would be the purpose we'd use those origination funds for. Again, we also, we've been doing this for the last few years with more and more frequency, but we thought it's important to actually state this in the guidelines, is relocation limitations. Is as we consider CIDs, council's made it very clear, we simply don't want to encourage one retail business to relocate across the street because we've now included incentive for that new area. So the goal is we've put relocation restrictions in on a case-by-case basis. For example, you see the ones listed here at Spaghetti Works, 3 years, approximately half-mile radius, Chicken and Pickle out at Greenwich, and in 21st, it's 3 years and approximately 2 miles, and so forth. We just think it's important that we put it into the actual guidelines versus just using the best practice. We're almost to the end, I promise. Just one additional thing we've made some changes.
Sir, we have a member who'd like to ask a question at this point. Councilmember Bluebog.
Thank you, Mayor. Hey, can you clarify your conversation going into the origination fee on the land bank for me, just so I
Sure. So the
understand
question that come up is, what do we utilize? Council had said in our retreat back in the spring, explore this idea about origination fee, and we discussed what potential revenue would generate. I think with 2 to 3 CIDs a year, we'd probably generate probably $20,000 to $30,000 a year on an annual basis. What do we use that for? And so there have been some discussions about, let's go fix sidewalks, let's go fix streets, let's go do a number of different things. As we talked in the incentive and land bank subcommittees, and as we talked internally, do we take a shotgun approach that every time we consider one of these things, we'll do one project over here, one project over here, and it's kind of haphazard, or do we look at a more focused application for those revenues? And that's where the land bank, the incentive subcommittee, and in talking with internal staff, is let's focus that on one particular project, such as the land bank, to focus those dollars so we have a better impact versus one-off type of projects.
So are you saying if a retail business went in the land bank, is that what, because I'm trying to, so how would you collect the CID on?
Maybe help me out on your question a little bit more. I'm trying to understand.
You'd be collecting the CID, Mayor?
Of course.
You'd be collecting the CID from the property that could be a retail development inside that zone. However, under this provision with the origination fee, those funds would be used then outside of the zone to acquire land in the core through the land bank.
So it would contribute to the.
Correct.
Okay, okay.
Correct. Sorry if I didn't make that clear.
Yeah, I was looking at it as trying to collect it on the other end. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so on TIF, this is a common tool used particularly in the downtown area. We've had a number of questions over the last few years about what's our focus, what's our priority. We've been typically focused on pay-as-you-go, meaning we'll pay out the TIF as you make those investments, as opposed to doing a bond up front and putting the city at somewhat at risk. So our preference, as we want to state in the incentive guidelines, is to do pay-as-you-go and to focus on infrastructure and public improvements and assets. And then one of the key things is you go through a TIF in the downtown area, you typically go through what they call the Downtown Review Committee, and there's a scoring process. We've had some developers in the past take the value of the TIF and put that as their equity. And that, I'll call it, that's future value versus what is the actual, I'll call it skin in the game they're putting up front. And so what we're saying is their dollars that they're putting up front into the project counts towards their qualification, not the TIF valuation. And the last one, this is probably has the most discussion out in the community, is technically under state law, land acquisition is an eligible expense. Historically, and for many of you that have been here much longer than I have, land acquisition under TIF has been questionable, and in recent years it's been kind of a non-starter. But after discussion with the partnership and the downtown development group and others, and as we look at how do we compete nationally for new capital investment for projects, land acquisition is a significant eligible expense, and we think it's important for the council to consider that. Again, at any point for any development agreement that comes forward to a council, council can always make that ultimate decision, do we allow it or we don't? But we want to state in our guidelines that it is an eligible expense.
Sir, we have
Yes.
another question from a Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Mayor. Scott, just to be clear, you're saying that land acquisition is an eligible expense under our current policy?
It is, but in practice, generally the feedback from council as we brought forth project has been no.
Okay.
We want to restate that the state code does allow it and that it isn't eligible. And so instead of, I'll call it haphazardly saying do we or do we not, we say it is eligible. Obviously, you have to submit your justification. At the end of the day, council can decide whether or not to do it or approve it. We're saying it is a valuable tool, and we don't want to turn off potential new investments simply because we put in our code that it's not an eligible expense.
Along those same lines, under the state code, vertical construction is not eligible.
It is, I'm gonna look back to my staff.
So in order to change that, we'd have to go to, we'd have to go to the state laws and get that changed, if that was a desire.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask our bond counsel to come in.
Pleasure.
Joe kind of knew this question was coming, so.
Oh, was you. Good morning, Mayor, council members. Joe Norton with Gilmore and Bill, the city's bond counsel. Generally speaking, vertical construction that's not governmentally owned is not eligible for TIF financing. However, there are some exceptions. The one we see most often is multi-story parking facilities. Even though they may be privately owned, they can be TIF financed. Secondly, there are certain types of museums, again, that are maybe privately owned by a 501c3 that could be financed. But generally speaking, you are correct.
Okay, thank you.
Scott, the floor is yours.
Okay.
Or slide 80.
I don't think there's actually 8 slides, but, so I think this is one of the last things. So one of the remaining questions we have from council is our facade program. Again, our facade program, the state facade program allows buildings that front right away. It can be eligible for essentially specialists to do facade improvements, and that's to reskin the building on any side that faces a right-of-way area. This is our current facade area. You see it's quite extensive, but the question had come up, should we expand that in light of places for people or opportunity zones or other considerations? So our recommendation is that we do include opportunity zones in this new facade, and I'll show you a map in a minute, as well as, for example, the places for people node, as well as recognized neighborhood districts that have gone through the city's process of having an actual plan approved. So the proposed new map, I know there's a lot of colors on here, but this is, I'll just recognize the red is the opportunity zones, and then the black, for example, is Douglas Design District, and it'd be for that whole entire area. We didn't want to go through and list every little node for places for people, because I think there's 41 nodes, and it'd be kind of a confusing map, but we're recommending this. As far as there are also any approved neighborhood district plan that's been through MAPC and council for approval is eligible as well. But again, we didn't want to create a map that showed every single one of those. For a full list, you can go to the MAPC website and they'll list those. This is not only eligible for the state facade program, but also our local facade program that we're working with housing to encourage often for opportunity zones. These are going to be, I'll call it mom and pop small businesses who may not qualify under the state program because they may be more traditional suburban type of development. So there's a street, sidewalk, and then they have their parking out front of their business and then the business. Under state law, they wouldn't be eligible. Under our local law or local program, they would be eligible to receive the local benefit of the facade program. We want to encourage facades, so as much as we clean and reskin downtown properties or properties along arterials, we think it's just as important to help those businesses that may be in our neighborhoods or in our, I'll call it, lesser developed or underdeveloped areas to receive that same opportunity for benefit of the facade program. Mayor, slide 104. No, I'm just joking. With that, those are again the major points. Obviously, there's lots of minor red lines throughout the whole document, but it is staff recommendation that council approve the economic development guidelines. Just a minor correction in the agenda report at the beginning. It says adopt a resolution. As we talked with law, there's no need to adopt a resolution, so we're simply requesting that council approve the economic development guidelines. At that, we'll stand for any questions. I do know Andrew Nave from the Great Wichita Partnership is in the audience at C2 and is available for questions, or he may want to add some comment as well, but I'll stand for any questions, Mayor.
Very good. Chair recognizes Councilmember Clendenin.
Thank you, Mayor. Real quick, and I may have missed it. If I did, I apologize. On the origination fee, knowing that it can be used outside the district, it's something that helps us make community improvements. Good thing. How is it collected? When is it collected?
So there's under the current process, for example, the current way is, let's say we retain our 10%. That is generated on the actual CID revenue that's generated within the district. The origination fee is different. That is an upfront negotiated fee between the council or the city and the developer. That developer then has the opportunity to pay it a one-time upfront, or could decide, let's say the value we determine is $100,000, and they may say, I don't want to pay $100,000 upfront, but I'll pay it over those 20 years. So every year they'd be assessed, would that be $5,000 every year for 20 years to total $100,000. So that's why I say that probably on an annual basis, our generation is probably gonna be somewhere in the 20 to 30,000. This isn't, it's still significant dollars, but it's not.
So that answers my question. That's a good answer, because I really don't want to stifle anybody from, doing a project because they have to pay up front.
Yeah, it's their choice. If they want to do it up front, that's great, but we think probably most likely they want to pay it over a payment program.
And again, if you had answered that, I apologize.
No, it's have to clear that up.
The other question I had is, does the origination fee have to be designated for something before, or are we banking that?
Our
for a future
recommendation, coming out of the incentive, again, out of the incentive subcommittee and the places in the land bank subcommittee, as well as talking to staff and others, is to focus those dollars on one particular use. In this case, we're recommending land bank, and that'd be either for maintaining existing land bank property or acquiring future land bank property. Now, I know in the coming weeks and months ahead, we'll be discussing the land bank particularly, but if that land bank is established, that's what our recommendation for those funds would be used for.
So that's kind of what the guidelines are. If I'm thinking we're in unprecedented times right now, and if we found that those dollars could be used somewhere else, are we flexible to do that?
I would urge your colleagues to be inflexible. The reason, you're correct, council member. These are guidelines, and the council is free to take final action, depending on circumstances. However, in order really to maximize the impact of the use of these dollars, I think it's important that we zero in on a specific use. And as Scott said, if you approve the creation of a land bank, then we think that it's consistent with what you've done with the Places for People plan and the focus on redevelopment of the core area.
I'm in full agreement. I'm in full agreement. Just knowing, though, that if there was an extenuating circumstance, that the council could take action and place funds somewhere else if something happened in a semi-emergency, that would be good to know, but okay.
Again, they're guidelines.
All right, thanks.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. First, Scott, again, I appreciate all your hard work on this and this presentation. So I didn't send you the email, but I would like to see if we could modify the redevelopment area on the kind of northern part, but at 21st Street, I would love to see that be expanded down Hillside up to 27th Street. which would take in more of the neighborhood and stop at Dr. Glendye Park.
If you want to submit, if you have a map or so, I'll try to follow you, what you said, but I want to make sure I get it correct. But that's up to a council. Happy to do that if that's what the council's desire is.
That's just an area I've heard quite a bit from because it was left out of potential opportunity zone. So we have a redevelopment area that would be an area right now that has a lot of vacant homes that I know the neighborhood association presidents are concerned about. So if we could get redevelopment there and it was within that area, that would be a huge benefit.
Mayor, if I may. Of course. Councilmember, what I'd like to do is go back, if you would provide the boundaries, that would be great. We need to look at the criteria that was used by the council to create the original redevelopment areas as well as the opportunity zones and determine whether or not the area that you're talking about would meet that original criteria. Now, the council's free to add to it, but that's what the base is for this map. And that's why, because it's a previous action taken by the council with a lot of deliberation and hearings on the original redevelopment areas.
Okay. Thanks, Bob.
Councilmember Bluebog.
Thank you, Mayor. And to echo on Councilmember Johnson's request there, I don't know when we had that discussion. I'd like to have it again because I'm looking at this and I'm trying to figure out why we're leaving out the McCormick neighborhood. Because I think that should be in both the redevelopment and the facade as well. So maybe we need to have that discussion before we make this final to make sure we're including some of these neighborhoods that really need it.
If I could, I would urge you to try to adopt the plan today as it is so we can move forward and get it over to the county. But I would like to then look at the areas. And if other areas are presented by council members, we can take all of that at one time, look at the original redevelopment criteria. And that, I don't want to misrepresent. Those areas were done before I was here. So that's probably at least 15 years since we've looked at the redevelopment area boundaries. And let's go ahead and take a look at those areas. Councilmember Blubaugh and I have had discussions about the opportunity zones and what was in and what was out. So I just want to make sure that we are clear about the criteria before we add areas. So I'd like to engage the council in that discussion. Maybe what we do is we go to a workshop and say, here's what was in the original. These areas have come forward from council members. Do we feel that they meet the criteria and therefore should, because I think it's important to recognize that redevelopment is a dynamic process, and and some areas are going to move forward and some are probably going to erode in terms of their conditions.
I think it's a great suggestion because it's been 15 years. A lot of, like Delano's kind of taken off now and some of these other areas aren't. So I think it's time to focus on some of the other areas that are just remaining stagnant.
Yep.
And we could amend this plan after adoption. There's nothing locking us in if we want to make adjustments.
Mayor, you're absolutely correct. That's one of the points I was trying to make is the last time we did this was 2012. Our preference is not to wait another 8 years to do an update. If council, as we go through experiences and learn and see what the market's doing, we may want to come back on a more annual basis, see if there's tweaks to this document. Again, they're guidelines. We want it to be flexible, want it to be representative of what's going on in our community, where we want the community to be going in the coming years.
Excellent. Councilmember Tuttle.
Thank you, and it's going to be a little redundant, but I was going to ask what would be the process to amend this? And then also, it's always nice if we can get an annual update or just revisit it again. Sometimes we put things on a shelf and, then they become stagnant, and I think just making sure that we revisit this annually will also just bring it to the forefront of our agenda.
Absolutely.
One of the most important things we can do in our community. So thanks for answering the question for me, Bob, and thank you, Scott, for all your hard work. Appreciate it.
Further discussion.
Mayor, if I could.
Oh, there's also discussion at Century 2.
Right, exactly. I want to mention, Scott talked about this in some of the other workshops, and I want people to understand there's a reason why this took so long, right? We started off with some revisions that we felt were necessary, but we engaged the partnership pretty extensively in the business community about what could we do to address their needs to encourage development. And I want to thank council members Blubaugh and Fry who worked with them because there were some serious policy issues, as you can imagine, that came up from the private sector. And they provided guidance through the process and determined what probably was feasible and what wouldn't be. And again, I want to thank them as well as the partnership leadership sorry there, for all of their efforts, because we were in discussions for over a year, I think, to get to this point. And the other thing that we talked about, I think, more during the retreat or workshop that I think is important, and maybe some of you will pick up on this later in your comments, but with what we're going through right now in the economic downturn, the timing of this document is extremely important, because we are now opening opportunities for small business and companies that wouldn't have been able to benefit under our old policies. And I think, if anything, we'll see a little more bias towards those small businesses that are struggling right now. And I think because of the criteria that you're considering, we'll be able to maybe move forward in a positive manner over the next several months as we go forward.
I got a council member on the list, and I also have a speaker at Century 2, so we will continue discussion. But before that, I would like to ask, just for institutional knowledge, Mr. Manager, when was the last time we revisited this plan?
Scott mentioned it was 2012.
Is there a way that we can, with the rapid changes of the economy, is there a way that we can revisit this plan more often, perhaps once a year, perhaps once every 6 months, with our ear to the ground to our business partners, particularly if we're going to be focusing a lot on smaller businesses, mom and pops businesses? There might be some changes that we could be more agile with as far as policy that could help us be more purposeful as the economy rebounds and has adjustments given our current situation. I think we're going to see a lot of changes in the economy moving forward, with people working from home, with the, I guess, emergence of Zoom, the Zoom economy. Is there a way that we could possibly revisit this in a few months, or make it more of a ongoing, even if it's just to present that it's working, it's not working, or it's working, but people have suggested, our business community has suggested a tweak here or there?
Yeah. Mayor, what I would suggest, Councilmember Tuttle has suggested an annual review, and then what I'd like to do is have that freedom to bring possible revisions to you if we find that there's something in this policy document, say maybe 6 months down the road, we find there's an impediment or some tweak that we can make that would help us as we move forward during coming out and during the economic recovery. But at least on a minimum, make it a dynamic plan and come back to the council every year. It's going to be hard in a couple of months to determine whether or not we really move the needle, but I think if you give us a little time, and especially if there's some inherent weaknesses, we can bring those forward quickly.
Definitely. I'm in complete agreement with Councilmember Tuttle, and that's a great idea. Councilmember Johnson.
Thanks, Mayor. Just 2 things. Bob, what you said is what really excites me about this, and potential help to our smaller businesses. But to follow up on Councilmember Tuttle, when we have our workshop, can we look at building metrics to evaluate the entire redevelopment area and look at new home creation, maybe new business creation? That way we can see how those areas are actually developing. Like, we all can visually see Delano right now, but just a report that shows within this section of the redevelopment area, 20 new homes were built, or 5 new businesses were started. Just something so we can keep track of that.
Setting a visual metric.
Yeah. I'm sure you're going to want to show in both directions, right? Also where there's been a deterioration of property, and property values.
We will defer the floor to Century 2, as we have a citizen there who would be interested in speaking to this topic. Sir, welcome.
Mic's not on.
Mic's not on.
Sorry, Andrew.
Oh, this is disappointing.
Poor Andrew. I know.
We appreciate your comments and we take them into consideration. Thank you, Andrew, for being here as always. Your words are well measured.
Try it now.
Okay, are you
All right, let's do that again.
Sorry about that, Mayor.
Oh, you're good.
Okay, again, Andrew Nave, Greater Wichita Partnership, 501 East Douglas. I'll be brief. You've heard from us before. We just wanted to thank the council and specifically your staff for allowing us to provide input and feedback in this process. We know it was a long process, but we very much appreciated providing some insight and some data from around the country, and then from some participants that have utilized the tools in the past. So especially want to, hard work by a number of folks, but leaning in heavily with your staff, with Scott Rigby and Tim Goodpasture and Mark Elder in the manager's office. We really appreciated the time to provide feedback. So very much encourage your affirmative support of this. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. We appreciate your input. Other discussion on this topic? Councilmember Fry.
Thank you. Really no questions for staff, just a couple of comments. There's a lot to unpack here, and obviously it's been necessary to review this after 8 years of working with existing policy, but there's some very good things in here that hopefully will continue to keep us moving forward. We've mentioned the opportunity for smaller businesses and being able to get in the game and having that opportunity. I think that's important. We're going to see our greatest growth from small businesses as they scale up. Acquiring a Tesla or an Amazon, maybe a warehouse, but maybe not on the corporate, but those are hard to get. And if we can help our small businesses and smaller manufacturers scale up, this policy will certainly help that. I think it's also very important to recognize that we're leveraging a lot of other considerations, including the state and federal incentives. That is not something that we've done before. This allows more people to put investment into Wichita, more people, more organizations, more entities to help us attract new businesses. The speculative office component, we've had great success so far with the industrial space, and this hopefully will follow that trend. We know it's a necessary thing to have in our community. We haven't had a lot of new Class A office space in a long time. So hopefully we'll be able to continue to realize some success with that. Still have heartburn over CIDs, as well documented, but I think this is more palatable, allows us some different ways to be flexible with the dollars and help areas that really need it, which is what CIDs were supposed to do, was to help improve blight and so forth. And this can help us do that. And so, again, a lot to unpack, but a lot of good things in here. We've already seen it 3 times this year with some other programs or some other projects that have come to us, and we've used that matrix to recognize it. So I think we're off to a great start, and just want to put the pedal down and keep moving forward. So thank you.
Councilmember Clendenin.
Thank you, Mayor. So I was here in 2012 when we were doing this, and we were talking with GWDC at the time about what changes needed to be made, and actually a lot of downtown changes in how we incentivize downtown because of some unfortunate things in the city's history that had happened. I think that was really kind of the catalyst for making a lot of the original changes. As we moved into working and dissolving GWDC and then forming the partnership, I think these talks started even back then about how are we going to do things differently. And I think we've made our own internal changes about cash and about forgivable loans and those sorts of kind of outdated ways of doing things for us, because we were trying to go toe-to-toe with some of the big boys, Dallas, some of the big states, and we're not going to be able to do that. And I'm really appreciative of this, because this is Wichita's way of doing it. This is Wichita's way of attacking economic development, and I think it's going to be very, very effective, especially because it's so flexible, and the conversation has been had for a long time. Why are we ignoring small businesses? Why are they not able to, if they're being successful, really get on board and helping them grow in our community, and maybe turning the next, allowing them to create the next Rent-A-Center, or the next Pizza Hut, or the next big thing here in town. And so I'm extremely pleased about that. And I'm also pleased that this really has a potential for increasing investment in areas of town that are declining. We've really lacked a lot of tools. Bob, I know you and I have talked a lot about the South Broadway corridor, some ideas that I've had for many years that we really just need help. We need some tools to try to make that happen. I know we need state help too, in changing some policies at the state level, but this really kind of gets us on the way. And some of those declining areas and some of the people in those areas should really be looking at this and putting their thinking caps on, and developers should start putting their thinking caps on how they can take advantage of some of the areas of opportunity in our city and the declining areas. So I'm enthusiastically supportive of this. I also have some of the concerns with CIDs as well. But I'm cautiously optimistic that when we're using CIDs, that we are going to really be able to use those to the benefit of some of the declining areas of town as well. So that being said, I want to thank Councilmember Bluebaugh and Councilmember Fry for all the work that they've done on this and the time and hours that they've put into it, and everybody at GWDC and staff. Thank you all very, very much.
Just want to echo the words of other council members on how a focus on small business is very timely. Right now, we know that nationally, 31% of small businesses have been rendered non-operational due to COVID. And as we rebound from this pandemic, having a strong policy that leans towards small businesses is going to be essential to our economic recovery. Small businesses create 1.5 million jobs a year nationally, and 40% of Americans either work for or own a small business. So I'm glad that our policy is going to have a focus on this, this not only trend, but really new reality. And with moving forward as we rebound, let's hope that we see not only great results from this, but also stay agile and make adjustments to this policy as needed. With that, I'll go ahead and make the motion to accept staff's recommended action to approve the 2020 Economic Development Guidelines.
Second.
Second. Motion was seconded by Councilmember Clendenin. Clerk will open the roll. Members cast the vote. With a result of 6 yeas to 0 nays, the motion does pass. Madam Clerk.
CARES Act funding allocations.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of the council.
Good morning.
I'm Sally Stang, Housing and Community Services Director, for the record. The item we have for you today is what we're referring to as the omnibus allocation item of CARES funding, as we're bringing 6 programs to you. Going wrong direction. So the city does receive an annual allocation of funds from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Those funds align with the city's goals of creating a livable and sustainable community, and the funds are used to create strong, sustainable, inclusive communities and affordable housing. Community Development Block Grant is used for a wide range of community development needs, and our annual award normal award for 2021 was just under $3 million. We also receive Emergency Solutions Grants, ESG, to address homelessness, and our 2021 allocation was just under $250,000. As a result of the passage of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Securities Act, the city has received additional CDBG and ESG allocations. We have until June 24th, 2022 to expend the ESG allocation, and we have till June 25th, 2023 to expend 80% of the CDBG funding, with the remaining 20% expended by 2026. So we have been very cautious in allocating funds as they're needed, because they need to cover a long period of time. So originally, we received an allocation of just over $1.7 million to prepare for, and respond to COVID-19 in the category of Community Development Block Grant. And we've received 2 allocations of ESG funds to prepare for COVID-19 among the homeless. And that total amount of that award was just over $3.3 million. The following allocation recommendations were made available on the city's website for public comment on October 1st, as required by HUD, to be published 5 days prior to bringing to council. Staff proposes the following funding allocations in the CDBG category. So we have an additional $75,000 for supplemental domestic violence shelter services. This particular item we discussed at the July 21st meeting, but we hadn't derived how that $75,000 would be divided. So we reached out to our domestic violence shelter providers to evaluate their additional needs, and are making the following recommendations: an additional $27,000 to Catholic Charities Harbor House, $6,900 to Stepstone, $38,100 to Wichita Family Crisis Center, and $3,000 to the Raise My Head Foundation. These supplemental allocations to the shelter services were capped at this point at 30% of the regular allocation, and we'll continue to communicate with those shelter providers in the future to see what the additional need is. We also reached out to the youth crime prevention enrichment programs, understanding they would have additional costs related to COVID-19. And 2 of the 3 agencies responded that they did have additional needs related to technology improvements to continue to have connection with youth participating, as well as supplies needed for distancing and PPE. So we're recommending an additional $10,000 to the YMCA and $9,900 to Kansas Big Brothers Big Sisters. And then that, again, is capped at about 30% of the regular CDBG allocation, and we will continue to communicate with those programs to see if their need expands in the future. An additional pot of funding has been made available for an internal program through the Parks and Recreation Department for their Plainview Youth Activity and Latchkey program. And in speaking with them, they do have additional requirements to support social distancing and sanitation, and we're recommending $6,200 to that program. We move on to CDBG Food Box Program. Previously, the council approved the Food Box Program, originally funded through the Kansas Blue Cross Blue Shield grant, and then continued under CDBG. And we're recommending we continue that program for an additional 12 weeks at the senior high-rise and garden apartments and public housing for bi-weekly delivery of food box items. And we're recommending a food box program for the seniors that live in public housing, single-family homes, and in the Housing Choice Voucher Program to be able to provide food box delivery to those residents too, at an amount of $50,000. So this slide is just a summary of where we are with the CDBG CARES allocations to date. In 2019, out of the 2019 period, we allocated just over $127,000. At this point, in total, we would be looking at $631,000. And then we have some recommendations. These allocations that we're recommending today total $191,000. ESG, so Emergency Solutions Grant, we're recommending funding $200,000 in the homeless prevention category. We fund Salvation Army and Center of Hope each year for homeless prevention. The amount we fund, though, is generally very small. Just our ESG funding is under $250,000. We recommended for 2021, the Center of Hope received $25,000. We're recommending we provide them an additional $100,000 out of ESG CARES Act funding, as we're expecting a slew of evictions to come forward in January when the CDC eviction moratorium is raised. And then the Salvation Army, their annual allocation was just over $13,000, and we're also recommending an additional $100,000 to Salvation Army for the same purpose. We've been a little challenged in homeless prevention. Under the ESG program, the regulations require that the recipient be under an eviction for us to provide rent assistance in this category. And the CDC moratorium actually prevents that from happening. So that is definitely a challenge, and it is something we've relayed to HUD, that they need to be able to provide us a waiver of that requirement at this time, but they have not come back with a waiver of that requirement. A new program, so the new funding we have available gives us an opportunity to be creative and try some pilot programs. We are recommending an allocation of $100,000 for the Wichita Housing Authority Landlord Incentive Program. This funding would provide financial assistance for damages, unpaid rent, or holding costs of a unit during the first year to incentivize landlords to lease and maintain safe, affordable housing for homeless individuals and families. So asking them to take a chance and provide housing to someone who's coming out of homelessness. We've actually received accolades from HUD for putting this program together, as HUD recognizes this is the most challenging population to house in private market housing. The second program, pilot, is a homeless outreach social worker internship program designed to assist unsheltered homeless individuals and families in identifying needed services. It would be an 18-month program to provide funds for qualified outreach supervisor and 4 part-time interns through a partnership with Newman University. So this would be MSW students getting some real on-the-job training at the same time we get the benefit of working with our programs. We see this outreach as a collaboration with the housing department and the homeless outreach team, obviously not looking to replace either. But we do see that it could greatly support our attempts to move as many homeless into housing as we can. And we've designed the internship program not to be specific to the homeless outreach activity, so that if there's a need in the future for other MSW interns, that we could utilize the same program. Again, another summary slide of what we've allocated so far in 2019-2020 program year. Almost $640,000 that we allocated. The current allocation recommendations are for $550,000, which would bring our 2020-2021 recommendations up to $882,000. So the ESG funding is exempt from match requirements and has to be committed by December 25th, 2020, and there's no impact to the general fund. All funding agreements will be approved as to form by the law department. And it's recommended that the City Council approve the funding allocations and recommendations and authorize the funding agreements and necessary signatures. And I stand for any questions.
Councilmember Tuttle.
I just have one question, and then I have many accolades. But for the first question is, how did we determine what was the process of who would what organizations would receive the funding, just so the community's aware?
So the domestic violence and youth crime prevention programs had been selected by the Grants Review Committee for our regular annual 2020-2021 allocations. So we reached out to those because they were already subrecipients of the grant agreements to determine what their need was.
Fantastic. Just wanted to make sure that the community knew that there was a committee that was involved and that there's community participation. So thank you. Now for the accolades. I just can't thank you enough, and to your team for doing this. I know you're already extremely busy with everything that you do, and then you add COVID to it, and then now the exceptionally challenging job of allocating funding. I've said consistently to you, I know from my past experience, it's actually harder to give away money than to receive money. So thank you for being so responsible and diligent in this process and reaching out to our community partners so that we can all work together. And then I also just have to say it warms my heart that the food box program was something that's going to be extended. I plan to reach out to Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Kansas and let them know that their seed money is creating something that we're going to be able to sustain for a little while longer. I think that'll be important to them and maybe encourage other partnerships. But again, just an outstanding job. You're a 21st century housing director, and we're very lucky to have you and your team. Thank you.
Councilmember Fry.
Thank you. Sally, echo all of those comments. I couldn't say it better, so I'm not going to try. But a question regarding the homeless prevention activities, the $200,000. You state that you anticipate the demand for the funding because the Center for Disease Control eviction moratorium is set to expire.
Right.
Is there any chance that that doesn't expire? And if so, then what happens to those funds?
We could look to reallocate those funds to another source,
Okay.
but at some point, it's going to stop, and we need to be prepared for that. And in the meantime, we are evaluating other resources. So we did receive, and it isn't in here yet, we've been notified of an additional allocation of CDBG CARES funding, and we can't move that forward for the amendment to the consolidated plan because HUD still is working on the last allocation. So part of that is why we've issued the landlord impact survey. So we're trying to get a much better idea of the breadth of the issue, where it's located, to be able to target resources. And if we use CDBG funding, they don't have that eviction requirement. The person just has to income qualify for rent assistance. So that is our hope going forward, that we will get additional funding that we could use before the eviction moratorium is lifted.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Other questions or comments? See none. Gotta figure out where the recommended action was. I wrote down all that good stuff we were doing, so I think it's the number 8 here. So I'll make the motion to accept staff's recommended action to approve the funding allocations and recommendations and authorize the funding agreements and necessary signatures. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Clendenin. There's no discussion on the motion. Clerk will open the roll. Then just cast the vote. With a result of 6 yeas to 0 nays, the motion does pass. Madam Clerk.
An ordinance amending sections 3.49.10, .30, .60, .70, .80, and .270 of Chapter 3.49 of the Code of the City of Wichita, Kansas pertaining to emergency records and repealing the original of said sections and repealing sections 3.49.90 and 3.49.245.
Welcome.
Good morning, Mayor and council members. Captain Clay German with the Wichita Police Department. As we say, the amendment is for these emergency record licenses. Background on that is Title 3.49 requires emergency record services to be licensed in order to participate in a rotation list to respond to traffic collisions. Costs for these tolls are paid by citizens involved in collisions when they request WPD to call a company on their behalf. The purpose of licensing record services is to control response times, to auto collisions, also to provide guidelines regarding cleanup of collision scenes. Offer protection to citizens by standardizing fees when the citizen is not in a position to call for competitive pricing. With the current licensing structure, it does not allow the city to deny a license based on criminal history. It does not allow the city to suspend or revoke a license due to commission of a crime. It does not allow the city to refuse to renew a license due to commissions of crimes. And it does not allow suspension or non-renewal for charging fees for work that has not been completed. The ordinance amendments adds the condition that violation of laws of moral turpitude are grounds to deny a license, suspend, or revoke. Clarifies that billing for services that have not been completed is ground for suspension. It does allow the chief of police or his designee to issue a short suspension immediately or a longer suspension with 5 days notice due to criminal activity. It also moves the city council to be the appeal panel while the chief of police issued the initial order a suspension, a revocation. Gives greater flexibility for the council to choose a panel in order so that they don't have to come in front of the entire council also. Authorizing denials, suspension, and revocations due to the commission of crimes protects the citizens. Allowing the chief of police to make these decisions streamlines the process and holds companies accountable. Record services retain their rights to a full hearing in front of the city council. Stakeholders were provided a copy of the proposed ordinance. We did meet with representatives of the emergency record services for any questions that they might have had. We did have one revision from that meeting, and it was placed into the ordinance. So it was incorporated into the final version. Our recommendation is to place the ordinance on first reading and authorize the necessary signatures. And I'll stand for any questions.
Are there questions or discussion? Councilmember Johnson.
Thanks, Mayor. Morning, Cap.
Good morning.
Hey, just a quick question about the chief of police having the ability to suspend a license. Why is it 5 and 10 days if a crime is committed? Why isn't it longer than that? Or what's the thinking?
The way the ordinance is right now, we only have a 5-day suspension period. The reason why we put that 5 days so that we could immediately suspend someone if there is a crime that's committed, so that we can do our research and investigation to see if something further should be done. He would have the ability to be able to do that, and the company would have the ability to bring it in front of the council.
So
also.
he could go past 5 days. That's just the starting point.
Yes, that's just the start.
Thanks, Cap.
Okay.
Other questions or discussion on this item? See none. With that, I will make a motion to take staff's recommended action to place the ordinance on first reading and authorize the necessary signatures. Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded by Councilmember Clendenin. If there is no discussion on said motion, clerk will open the roll. Members will cast the votes. With a result of 6 yeas to 0 nays, the motion does pass. Madam Clerk.
Zone 2020-7, city zone change from single-family residential to two-family residential located approximately 1,800 feet south of West 47th Street South and east of South Seneca Street.
Welcome.
Good morning. Scott Wadle, Planning Director. The case before you was originally scheduled on the September 22nd City Council agenda. Since that time, we have discovered that there was a publication error with the case. The Wichita Eagle never published the public notice for the public hearing. State law requires that the public notice be published before the public hearing, and as a result, this case has been rescheduled for the MAPC November 5th meeting, which is the earliest meeting we could make following the required 20-day public notice. Following that public hearing, we anticipate that this case will be brought to you on December 8th, and the staff recommendation is that you defer this item until December 8th.
Discussion. Councilmember Bluebog.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Originally, this was on the consent, and I think I had reached out to the city manager as well as I think Councilmember Clendenin asked that it be pulled. The reason I wanted it to be pulled is because the owner had reached out to me, and it was my understanding there was no neighborhood protest and no one upset with the idea of making these multifamily lots. I understand the lots have remained single-family lots for years and no one's built on them. And then I understand someone from the Planning Commission, there was discussion, kind of their own ideas that they thought so much of this footprint should be single-family housing. So I guess that was my issue, and I wanted to address that now rather than in December, just to kind of send the message back to trying to understand what the process is over there. If the neighborhood's not complaining and if the planning commission members are coming up with this ideas, I guess I'd just like to learn a little bit more about what the strategy is over there.
Councilmember Fry.
Thank you. My question is not exactly related to the zoning, but the process with the Eagle not publishing the notice. Was that an error on their part, or was that a staff issue?
I think there were two things that contributed to it. Our staff person who normally sends those in was away on vacation. This occurred back in August. And so we had a different staff person send it in. They did not look to make sure that they got a confirmation email back from the Eagle indicating that it was going to be published. But at the same time, the Wichita Eagle didn't contact us other than to say, ask us if we were going to sign up for a new account, which we thought was just a sales solicitation. So those were the two factors that came in.
Do we also publish it on our own website, this information?
No, not to my knowledge. I mean, we put up the agendas and everything for the meetings, but we don't have a special section for public notices.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Thank you.
Any further questions or discussion on this item? If none, I would defer to Councilmember Blubach of District 4 for a motion.
Thank you, Mayor. And I guess the appropriate action is going to be to defer the consideration on this case until December 8th, 2020.
I will second the motion. There's no discussion on the motion. Clerk will open the roll. Members can cast their votes. With the result of 6 yeas to 0 nays, the motion does pass. Madam Clerk.
Public hearing 2021 Annual Agency Plan.
Welcome back.
Good morning again, Mayor, City Council member, Sally Stay, Housing and Community Services Director for the record. The item I have for you now is our 2021 Annual Agency Plan for the Public Housing Authority programs. So public housing authorities are required to prepare an annual agency plan. The Housing Authority owns and manages 578 units of public housing and just over 3,000 housing choice vouchers. Our housing choice voucher jurisdiction includes all of Sedgwick and Butler counties and Harvey County, with the exception of the city of Newton. The annual agency plan documents include the method of rent determination, general operating policies and procedures, and a statement of capital improvements. So our housing authority accomplishments for the past year include expansion of our housing supply, affordable housing supply, including the application for additional VASH vouchers. We currently have 208 active Veterans Affairs supportive housing vouchers. And we were awarded the 10 foster youth to independent vouchers that we brought to you a couple of months ago. We've implemented a residency and homeless preference in the Housing Choice Voucher Program. The residency preference ensures that we serve those who live within our jurisdiction before serving those coming from other jurisdictions in other states. And the homeless preference has been pivotal in our attempt to move more of those experiencing homelessness into housing. We have promoted self-sufficiency. We have 129 families who currently participate in the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. We had 7 graduate in 2020 and receive an escrow check, and we have 2 that are ready for homeownership. Our Individual and Family Development Program under WISCAP also assisted an additional 63 Housing Choice Voucher families and 42 public housing families in job search, job training, and other services. This year's Way to Work program, we had 98 youth, and we placed them in age-appropriate jobs through the Way to Work program, and many of them coming from our voucher program and public housing. We're working with Cox Communication to provide the internet access to these families and have provided food boxes to seniors participating in public housing. So those are just some highlights from the past year. We have 2021 goals that include advocating and marketing for fair housing, increasing housing choice voucher utilization, and we're strengthening our family self-sufficiency program by merging the family self-sufficiency staff and the individual and family development staff to leverage their funding and resources. Our goal for next year is 225 youth in the Way to Work program, and to effectively transition our senior properties under RAD. I know, I giggled too. Capital Fund Program, we receive capital funds for our public housing properties, which have been significantly diminished in recent decades, but we are receiving just over 1.4 million. 25% of that goes to operations, 10 to administration, and then we have fees, costs, rehab, demo, disposition, and temporary relocation because of our plans to reposition public housing. So we're going to give you a little bit of a RAD update. So start with the background. RAD is authorized by Congress in fiscal year 12, and it is meant to allow PHAs to convert typical public housing to a Section 8 contract. The benefit of doing that is it allows the property to acquire debt and raise private sources to do rehabilitation, to address things such as deferred maintenance that have been caused due to underfunding of the capital fund. In 2017, the WHA board approved the RAD application. HUD approved it in October of 17. We hired a RAD consultant in October of 17 and selected KBK Enterprises as our co-developer in March of 2018. So our next steps, we've had lots of hurdles we've talked about. I finally feel like we're moving forward for the senior project. Our financing plan is scheduled to be submitted to HUD on October 19th, and we're having an additional resident meeting this Thursday, updating the residents on the updated timeline and relocation strategy that has changed. The tentative financing and RAD closing is scheduled for February 22nd, 2021. It's nice to have a date. We just hope we can hold on to that one. The plan is that beginning late February and early March, we'll begin construction on the Rosa Gregg and Bernice Hutcherson senior complexes. But what we've changed on this is we've decided to do those complexes in stages, 10 to 20 units at a time. This will allow the residents to stay in their current unit while some are being rehabilitated, and then we'll be able to move them one time across the complex to a completely rehabilitated unit, and then we'll begin construction on the newly vacated units. This should be significantly less cumbersome for the residents. Also in late February, early March, the residents at McLean Manor will be temporarily relocated to Greenway Manor so that construction can begin on McLean. We're going to see a significant savings in relocation costs because we're able to relocate them into the building that we own. The McLean construction will take about 10 months and is pretty significant. Once the construction is complete, the McLean residents will return to McLean, and the Greenway residents may apply for a permanent transfer to either McLean or to Rosa Gregg or Bernice Hutcherson for any vacancies there, or they'll be relocated into private units during construction. The Greenway construction will take approximately 10 months, and any resident that was temporarily relocated from Greenway will return to Greenway once construction is complete. The relocation will be coordinated through our relocation coordinator, R.H. Brown and Associates, and all costs will be covered by the project. The residents will continue to complete their income certifications and pay only 30% of their monthly adjusted income. So that is where we are with the senior project. I'm very, very hopeful. We'll be bringing a couple of items to you in the next couple months related to the bond issuances and financing agreements. Things are definitely moving forward. We've also selected Mennonite Housing to be our management agent for the project. We're very excited to be working with Mennonite, one of our closest partners in affordable housing. Now, the single-family scattered site units, as we know, have been even more troublesome. This map just kind of gives you an idea that they are scattered truly throughout the community, and there are 352 of them. So in February of 2019, it was determined that our units were too scattered for HUD to finance, which is kind of funny, I think, right? They tell us on one side on the PHA, manage and maintain these units, but then go for HUD financing, and they're like, no, your units are too scattered. They're too difficult to manage and maintain. In March of 2019, we requested a waiver of that regulation and were denied. We continue to try and restructure the project into two projects, one that might meet the requirement, one that doesn't. Then Bank of America withdrew its letter of intent for the 4% tax credits, which left it with no equity partner. We approached multiple investors, all of them saying the same thing. Those units are too scattered, it's too much risk, they're going to be too hard to maintain and manage. We're not interested. So our tax credits that were awarded and bond volume cap expired on December 31st of 19, and we were unable to secure the necessary financing to move the project forward under RAD. So we have in this plan a request to go to HUD to use different repositioning strategies for the properties. So HUD has available Section 18 of the Act, which allows demolition and disposition of those properties. We look to apply to HUD to demolish or dispose of any number of units and request to transfer that rent subsidy to a newly constructed project or property in the future. The properties must be sold at market value, with current occupants having the right of first refusal. All proceeds returned to any replacement property. The PHA must demonstrate that the retention of the property is not in the best interest to the residents or the PHA because the conditions of the area adversely affect the health and safety of the residents, or disposition allows the acquisition, development, or rehabilitation of other properties that can be more effectively or efficiently operated as low-income housing. So we believe we have that covered very well in the fact that HUD would not approve a HUD 221D4 loan on the properties as they were originally proposed. But we also have another option, and that's HUD Section 22 voluntary streamline conversion, and this is only available to small public housing authorities with less than 250 units. This is something that we would employ once we've sold off a piece of the portfolio or a number of the properties and got our total number of units down under 250. There's an additional advantage. One, they streamline the process for us, but two, for every resident, they give us another voucher. So we'll have the ability to, and as we are looking to sell some of these properties to our partners in the community, we have a preference to keep them either affordable rentals or affordable home ownership. So under Section 22, if we can sell to one of our partners and have a long-term affordability clause, that's one unit of affordable housing. They give us a new voucher, that's another unit of affordable housing, and we get to build a replacement unit, which means we can turn one affordable unit into three. So this is definitely an avenue we are looking to take. We can apply, this is often used, like I explained, for larger programs that have converted public housing properties under any of the repositioning strategies and have reduced that amount down to 250 units or less, and they receive that tenant protection voucher. So at this point, with the approval of our agency plan, once it's approved and effective for January 1st, we can apply to HUD to demolish and or sell the properties with a preference for continued affordable rentals or affordable homeownership with the right of first refusal by current tenants. We'll provide residents with permanent relocation through the Housing Choice Voucher Program with the assistance of our relocation coordinator, R.H. Brown and Associates. And we want to make available project-based vouchering for single-family units when developers want to maintain them as affordable rentals in the long term. So some of our partners could have a means to have long-term rent subsidy on the properties that they purchase. In the future, we'd like to replace those units with the development of new multifamily replacement rental housing, 40 to 60 unit properties, and of course have accessible units. The location of those replacement housing is yet to be determined. We've been looking at properties across the city, and we're always looking for ones that have public transportation, access to good schools, access to services. So it's a challenge to find the right locations, but also have them not so large that they're very intrusive on any existing neighborhoods. So possible financing sources for those replacement housing is the proceeds from the sale, obviously. We can apply for 4% or 9% tax credits, Federal Home Loan Bank Affordable Housing Program. We can expand our Fair Cloth units. We have an option to do that. The home program, CDBG, HUD loans, project-based vouchers. It's all a big mix. We used to call finance stacking. I now call finance braiding because it gets pretty complicated. So the annual plan schedule, so we had a resident advisory board review on August 12th. We had to publish the annual agency plan, which included a complete overhaul of our administrative policies and procedures, which were attached in the documents. That was out for a public comment period for 45 days. Today is the public hearing, and our hope is once approved, we can submit it to HUD on October 9th. They have until January 1st to approve the plan. So it is recommended that the Wichita Housing Authority Board conduct public hearing, close the public hearing, approve the plan, and authorize the necessary signatures to certify the annual agency plan for submission to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And I stand for any questions.
Questions on the item? There are no questions on the item. Then I will make the motion that we take staff's recommended action to conduct the public hearing on the Wichita Housing Authority 2021 Annual Agency Plan, approve the plan, and authorize the necessary signatures to certify the annual agency plan for submission to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Is there a second?
Do we need to go out to public comment, or did we?
I have not had any indication that there is public comment. They normally text me if someone's there, but I'll double check.
No, you're fine there. Second.
Thank you for the reminder.
Second.
We still need a second. Thank you. Seconded by Councilmember Clendenin. If there's no discussion on said motion, clerk will open a roll. Members will cast their vote. The result of 6 yeas to 0 nays, the motion does pass. Madam Clerk.
Councilmember appointments and comments.
Appointments and comments. Let's start with appointments, if possible. Councilmember Bluebock.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to appoint Stephanie Yeager to the CSBG Review Committee.
Other appointments. See none, let's go ahead and I will second the appointment. So let's go ahead and vote on the appointment if there is no discussion.
Mayor, was there a motion for the appointment?
I believe the appointment itself was the motion. That's how it was interpreted. Was that a motion to appoint?
It wasn't a motion.
Yes. And since there's no appointments afterwards, a secondary motion, my interpretation wasn't necessary, but we will interpret it as the motion in a second. With that, clerk will open the rolls. Members will cast the vote. With the result of 6 yeas to 0 nays, the appointment does pass. Back on comments. Comments for the good of the group. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. Didn't want to do this earlier when Sally was speaking because it's a little different, but just want to thank Sally for coming to the District 1 breakfast. She had a wonderful presentation, gave out so much information. I think some people had to watch the video twice just to take it all in, but we're doing a lot of great work with the city. We heard some of those questions during the budget discussions, but Sally really broke down the things that we're doing in a way that was digestible, and we still have more that we're doing that we didn't get to in that 90-minute breakfast. But just want to shout out Sally for that. Does a great job.
Councilmember Tuttle.
Thank you. Earlier in the meeting, we heard a proclamation for Walktober, and I just wanted to make a quick comment to thank all the community partners who are leading that. I know the Health and Wellness Coalition and Bike Walk Wichita, and I know Extension and Aging, and lots of other partners are involved. I'm proud to say that over about a dozen years ago, I was at the health department, and my team and I developed Walktober for our community as a way to get people out and moving during one of the best months to walk. The temperatures are great, the leaves are beautiful, And we want people to develop a habit of walking, not just for a month, but for hopefully their lifetime. It was mentioned in the proclamation that it's, really inexpensive exercise. It's a way to get out and engage in your community. It also provides more opportunities for people to learn about our great city. And now more than ever, I think people are looking for activities that they feel safe, and walking outside is certainly one of them. So just want to encourage everyone to go to the Bike Walk Wichita website and learn more about how they can participate in Walktober. Thank you.
Further discussion or comments? See none. With that, I'm going to make 3 consecutive motions for 10-minute executive sessions each. They are as follows. I move that the City Council recess into executive session for 10 minutes to receive information on a civil action pursuant to KSA 7543-19B2 for legal consultation with the city attorney, which would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship regarding pending litigation, legal advice. The executive session is required to protect the attorney-client privilege and the public interest. I have a motion for that to start at 11:45 and end at 10:45. Do we make motions on each of these? That was a motion. Look for a second.
Your time, Mr. Mayor, if you could clarify the time.
You said 1:45.
Did I say 1:40?
Yeah.
11:45, yes, please. 11:45 to 11:55. Is there a second?
It's 11:11 right now. I'm sorry, I'm confused.
My watch not telling right now? My apologies.
Yeah, so maybe 11:15 to.
11:15, there we go, my apologies, guys. 11:15 to 11:25.
Second.
Clerk will open the roll, members cast the vote. With a result of 6 yeas to 0 nays, motion does pass. Next one is, I move that the City Council recess into executive session for 10 minutes to receive information and offers of settlement and environmental mitigation projects pursuant to KSA 7543-19B2 for legal consultation with the city attorney, which would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship pending litigation, claim settlement. The executive session is required to protect the attorney-client privilege and the public interest. I move that starts at 11:35 and goes on to 11:45. 11:25 and goes to, I was gonna say 11:30 actually. Give us a couple minutes in case we need to extend. 11:30 to 11:45.
So Mayor,
Yes.
with each one of these having a close, are we going to have to come back and close each one of these before we move on to the next one?
It's my opinion that we can make consecutive motions in the meetings. Each executive session is for a time certain, and it would be in compliance with the Open Meetings Act.
Okay, so we don't have to come back and close out each one before moving on
I
to
believe
the
one
next
motion to close the meeting will be sufficient.
Okay,
One
thank you.
motion to close all 3 so we can do them consecutively.
Second.
Motion was made and seconded. Clerk will open the roll. Six yeas, 0 nays, motion passes. Last one. I move that the City Council recess into executive session for 10 minutes to receive information on a potential civil action pursuant to KSA 7543-19B2 for legal consultation with the city attorney, which would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship over potential litigation, legal advice. Executive session is required to protect the city's right to the confidentiality of its negotiating position and the public interest. A motion that this starts at, should I get this right? Fry, jump in if I don't. At 11:55 and goes until 12:05.
Is that right? We good?
I think it's 11:35 to 45.
Am I off?
Right?
extra time was added somewhere along
Excuse
the
me, I
way.
meant, yeah, 11:50, starts at 11:50 to 12.
No, they're,
35, 45.
no, the mayor put a 5-minute gap in there and did 11:30 to 11:45.
Yes.
On the second one.
Correct.
In case we had to extend for a couple minutes, so 11:45 was, the last one ended 11:45, this one was to begin at 11:50 until 12 would give us that 10 minutes. I should have wrote these down.
If I could, I would recommend that session number 3 begin directly after number 2 with 11.
Okay, wish I did that in the beginning of all these motions. I accept that. Make a motion that session 3 begin at the conclusion of number 2, executive session 2, and last for 10 minutes. I got comments from Councilmember Frye,
No, that should have been withdrawn.
Councilmember Bluebock.
Thank you, Mayor. Have we had a procedural change? Because I don't know that we've ever done these consecutive like these before, and it doesn't, have we been doing it wrong?
We have trying to tighten up the process in response to guidance from the Attorney General's office. We've done these at some point consecutively. We have done these like this, not 3 at once in one meeting probably.
Have they reached out to us? Has someone reached out to us to tell us we weren't doing it correctly? or-
And not directly to us. We're just trying to follow the guidance from the Attorney General's
If
office.
we don't resolve this quickly, we're going to be in violation of starting it, so.
Yeah, we had, and let's someone say second, please.
I'd be curious to see what their opinion is now.
Can we get a second for the motion?
Second.
Motion is made and seconded. Clerk will open the roll. Members cast the votes. With a 6-0, motion passes. We are now in executive session.